Good morning, everyone. My name is Jessica Ahlstrom, and I am a water conservation specialist in the City of Bozeman. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. So today we will be talking about water smart growth, and specifically we're going to be discussing water adequacy requirements and water efficiency in the City of Bozeman. And this project was a partnership between the City of Bozeman and the Alliance for Water Efficiency. Next slide.
So my name is Mary Ann Dickinson from the Alliance for Water Efficiency, and I'm just going to go over a little bit of logistics for the workshop today. So welcome, everyone. The audio for this workshop webinar is through your telephone or your computer, microphone, and speakers, either one. The workshop will be 120 minutes in length, so we have booked about 2 hours. We might not need all that time, but we've booked it just in case. And in that time, we have booked adequate opportunity for you to ask questions. And I will explain how you do that in just a minute. The phone lines are all muted during this workshop presentation because we're recording it. And in order to have a very clean recording, we need to make sure that the background noises from our participants are minimized and muted. So you won't have the ability to talk on this workshop and to ask your questions verbally, but you can type in your questions. And the questions can be typed in throughout the workshop as we go along. And we'll be addressing and answering them at the end of the workshop by the speakers who are part of the workshop. And whatever speaker you would like to ask your question of, just let us know, where you would like them to answer it. And the way you type in your questions is through the GoToWebinar dialog box. If you look in your upper right-hand corner, there is an orange rectangle with a white arrow, and when you click and open it up, it will bring up a dialog box that has an area for you to be able to type in your questions. And please feel free to go ahead and do that as we proceed through the workshop. We've also put together a one-page handout that is posted in the GoToWebinar dialog box. So if you take a look at that area where you can type in questions, you'll also see something that says handouts. And if you open that up, you can download a PDF of the handout that describes the program that we're going to be talking to you about today. So I think that does it for logistics. Just want to introduce the speakers for this workshop. You've already met Jessica Ahlstrom with the City of Bozeman. We'll also hear from Brian Heaston with the City of Bozeman, and myself, Mary Ann Dickinson. I'll talk about our NetBlue program, and we'll also hear from Dwight Merriam, an attorney at law who's been very involved in this project, and we'll introduce him a little bit later. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Jessica.
Thank you, Mary Ann. So on the screen, we have our agenda of the topics we'll be discussing today. We're going to start things off talking a little bit about Bozeman's water supply and demand. That should probably say demand issues. And then we'll move in and hear from Mary Ann about the NetBlue project, and then dive into some of the details of how the city is applying some of these NetBlue policies in Bozeman through our water adequacy requirements. And from there, we'll move in to discuss how all of that ties into some of Bozeman city plans. And then last but not least, we'll hear from Dwight about how this type of program can be a benefit to developers. And so as Mary Ann mentioned, we have 2 hours for this. We expect that all the presentations through item 6 on the agenda will probably take an hour and a half or less, with plenty of time for questions and comments at the end. Next slide. So Bozeman is located in Southwest Montana, for any of you on the call who are not from here. And we rely on snowpack and surface water for our water supply. We get our water from 3 main sources. 40% of our water comes from Highlight Creek and Highlight Reservoir, which is just south of the City of Bozeman. You can see the watershed outlined on the map on the left. An additional 40% of our water comes from Bozeman Creek or Sourdough Creek watershed. And the last 20% comes from Lyman Creek, and that's north of town in the Bridger Mountains. And really, it's a spring that we capture as it surfaces. And so, as mentioned, you know, we really rely on surface water entirely for our water supply throughout the year. We use, as a city, about 6 million gallons of water per day, with a population of probably over 50,000 now, and we have roughly 14,400 service connections. Next slide. So here you can see what our total annual water consumption is based on our customer classes. And so about 40% of our annual water use is used in single-family homes, 24% in multifamily and commercial, followed by government, Montana State University, and our one industrial customer that we have here in Bozeman. Next slide. This is showing 2019 monthly water demand by customer class. So you can see across the x-axis, you know, we have January through December, and then millions of gallons on the y. And those big long green lines in the summertime represent single family water use. And so you can see here that across all customer classes, and especially single family, we see a big increase in water use due to lawns and landscapes. Total annual water use across all customer classes is about 30% used outdoors. And so in Bozeman, we're watering our lawns basically from the end of May through September, so a little over 4 months, and 30% of the use in the city goes to do that in the summer. And when you look just at single family water use, you can see that 50% of total annual water use is used in lawns and landscapes with our single family homes. And so because of this, the city's water conservation program has really been focusing on outdoor water use, specifically within our single family customer class. Next slide. So we know that single family homes are being built on smaller lots now than they were historically. And because of the high amount of water we see used on lawns and landscapes within this class, we wanted to answer the question, do these smaller lots translate to lower outdoor water use? How can we expect current single-family development trends to impact water use? And so the graph here has a lot going on, but let me explain it. So it's looking at average single-family water use and average parcel size. And so on the x-axis, we've broken up single-family homes into cohorts based on when the homes were built, because we're really trying to look at how water use has changed from older homes to new homes. And so the first group on the left on the graph is homes built prior to 1950. The next group is 1950 to 1988. The third group is 1988 to 2009. And the fourth group is any home built after 2009. And you can see water use on the left y-axis, and then parcel size on the right y-axis. And so you can see that the blue bars between each of the cohorts really kind of stay the same, and that's representing indoor water use. You can see that homes built after 2009 do appear to use water a little bit more efficiently in homes, which does make sense given the increase in efficiency that we're seeing in plumbing products. And then if you look at the gray bar for each of the groups, that's representing average summer use, and the orange bar is representing outdoor use. And so if you stack the blue on top of the orange, that gives you the gray. And you can see that average outdoor use certainly increases as we move from older homes to the newer homes that are built in the last 10 years. And the yellow bar, or excuse me, the yellow line on the graph is showing average parcel size. And so you can see that average parcel size decreases over, you know, any homes built after 1988. And while the parcel size decreases, outdoor water use is increasing. So what we actually see is that homes built after 1988 are on lots that are 20% smaller, but outdoor water use has more than doubled in those homes. And when we ran this analysis, this isn't exactly what we expected or what we were hoping to see, honestly. So we took it one step further and ran an analysis to determine how the outdoor water use within each of these groups compares to the water demand of the landscapes. So basically, we want to know, okay, we see that these new homes are on smaller lots. They're using more water outside, but are they actually overwatering their landscapes? Or, are they still just meeting the needs of the landscape? And we found that the typical home built after 2009 is overwatering their landscape by nearly 25% of the demands of the landscape, while all typical homes built prior to 2009 are actually underwatering. And these trends are important for the city to understand, as we work to manage Bozeman's water supply issues with our demand patterns. Next slide. So keeping all of this in mind, I wanted to touch on some of our water supply issues. So we've just discussed some of the demand issues that we're seeing and how our water is being used. And this is sort of a laundry list of all the reasons that the city does focus on conservation as a way to generate additional supplies. So Bozeman is located at the headwaters of the Missouri River Basin. So we have no upstream to go to get more water. We have very high water quality, but low water quantity. We're in a semi-arid climate here, receiving about 16 to maybe 18 inches of precipitation a year. As mentioned earlier, we rely on snowpack and surface water for our water supply, which can easily be impacted by changes in climate. And in the future, we expect to see less annual precipitation and more rain instead of snow, and we really rely on that snowpack specifically for our water. We also expect to see earlier peak runoff and drier, hotter summers. Bozeman's drought prone and has experienced many drought events in the past. And we're in a closed basin. And when I say that, I'm really talking about water rights. And so as mentioned, Bozeman relies on surface water and has surface water rights to supply the city. And there are no more of those to be purchased. They have all been appropriated. And so it's difficult for the city to just go out and buy more water. Furthermore, water conservation is very cost effective with an immediate return. So a drop of water we save today is available for use tomorrow. And of course, any of you on the call that live in Bozeman know that we have a very high population growth, which is just exacerbating the demand on these finite supplies. Next slide. So this graph is showing our water supply and demand, historical population growth, and then future projections. So we have year on the x-axis from 2000 to 2040, and you can see the dark blue dots represent census estimates of population, and then the light blue little triangles represent population projection if we continue to grow at a little over 4% a year. So if everyone in the city continues to use the same amount of water they are right now, and if we continue to grow at this high rate of over 4%, we can expect our demand for water to exceed supply in roughly 2031. So a little over 10 years away. So that's around the corner. And you can see here that this intersection of these two red lines represents that point at which demand will exceed supply if these things remain the same. And that would serve a population of about 83,000 people. Next slide. So again, for all these reasons, the city really focuses on water conservation and is actually planning to use conservation to generate 50% of needed future water supplies to support our current population and population as we grow. And that's a pretty big undertaking. 50% is very substantial. And in order to meet that, we're really going to have to take a hard look at our code and our ways of how we handle growth is in terms of our water supply. And one way of doing that is through what we've done in this project with the Alliance for Water Efficiency. So the city has revised its water adequacy requirements, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And we did so with the intent to incentivize developers to install high efficiency indoor plumbing fixtures, outdoor irrigation componentry, and drought tolerant landscaping in new and existing developments. And we're doing this with the intent to balance population and economic growth with our water supply issues. We're also taking a look at our landscape code currently, and that's not part of this project, but something that I wanted to mention because it will likely impact new development in the coming years. Next slide. So now that everyone on the call has a little bit better idea of Bozeman's water supply and demand patterns, I wanted to pass the mic over to Marianne to talk a little bit about NetBlue.
Thank you, Jessica. As I mentioned, my name is Marianne Dickinson. I'm the president and CEO of the Alliance for Water Efficiency. And we've developed at the Alliance for Water Efficiency a program that we call NetBlue, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about it sort of from the national perspective. The problem as we identified it is that we were seeing with the cities that we were working with in North America that a number of them, like Bozeman, are already challenged to meet their customer demands for water, especially as those demands were projected to grow over time. With population growing and with economic development happening, we wanted to take a look at how that placed more pressure in arid and water short areas, and how would those areas be able to accommodate that growing population and economic growth given finite limits on water supplies. And as areas were beginning to experience drought and water shortages, and that's not just in the arid West, but we were seeing it happening in other parts of the country, like New England, for example. Residents in those communities were raising the issue about, was there enough water for this new development if they are currently being restricted because of water shortages already existing in the community? So it was setting up the problem area here, and what we were looking at was a situation where some communities were not able to accommodate growth with their current water supplies, and they were facing a situation where they were needing to enact moratoriums on water development. And that's a situation that's a very uncomfortable one for communities and developers alike. You know, that's never a good option when you have to resort to a moratorium on new water connections or new development because it's not clear where that water is coming from. And here's just a couple of newspaper articles that talk about this in different areas of the country. And so as part of our work, we took a look at a map that the Environmental Protection Agency has posted on its WaterSense website. And we thought this was really helpful when we were starting our NetBlue program because it identified where there were rapid areas of growth in the United States and how it corresponded to water availability and water use. So the percentages in each of these states shows the difference in population between the year 2000 and 2015. You'll see that states like Michigan, for example, that have quite a bit of water available to them, had zero population growth. But a state like Nevada, understandably a desert state with water supply issues, experienced a 43% growth during that period of time. So the growth doesn't necessarily occur where the water supplies are. Bozeman experienced a 14% growth during this period of time. So we see the development pressures that Jessica was talking about. But the color of the state also indicates the domestic water use in terms of gallons per day per person. So the darker the color and the more blue the color, the higher the water use was on a per person basis. So again, we're not seeing where states that typically have a lot of water, let's look at Maine, for example. They have a very low per capita water use, but they have plenty of water. Whereas you take a look at states in the West, they're much darker in color because their gallon per day per person is a much higher value. So the message we took from this map is we're kind of growing in the wrong places from a water supply perspective. So we need to come up with a strategy for how we can accommodate that. People want to live where they want to live, and so we need to figure out how that water supply is going to be there for them. So the answer we came up with in developing our NetBlue program was the concept of water offsets. Offsets are a strategy that are in use in other natural resource areas. Air quality has had air offsets for probably a 30-year period. There's offsets in wetlands mitigation. But we had never really thought about doing it in terms of water supply, because we thought, well, if a developer brings a water offset to the table, that can allow growth without increasing the system-wide water consumption and demand in a community and in a water supply service area. And we think of offsets as being a combination of making the development on site as efficient as possible, and then contributing to off-site water efficiency so that the total water demand approaches zero. And it sort of achieves a water neutrality perspective. So that was our aspiration. We wanted to try to extend out what the development window might be in these communities by giving them an opportunity to offset growth as it went along. And that can reduce or sometimes even completely eliminate the impact of a new development on water supply if they can do close to 100% offset. And of course, that helps avoid a building moratorium in a resource constrained service area. Again, we want to try to avoid that situation. So we went to take a look at what that might look like. And the first thing we did was we published a report. You see a picture of it here. It's posted on our Alliance website. And we reviewed not only the literature, but actual examples of where we knew water offset ordinances existed around the country, because we thought where those ordinances might already exist, they would be learning examples for us to go from. So we took a look at those. There were 13 or so communities that had them around the country, and the report goes into quite a bit of detail about it. So we dissected what those offset ordinances looked like, and we tried to figure out what the lessons learned were so that we could design a great model template framework for anyone around the country that wanted to do this program. And so we've developed a model ordinance tool that does that. It has an offset tool as well. And so what it does is it takes the elements of the existing water offset ordinances that we found around the country, drew from their experiences and the research that we had conducted. So we call the program NetBlue, and we always get questions about why it's called that. And it's really because it's really essentially a net zero kind of concept, but the way net zero is often applied, it seems that many of those developments are off-grid, and we did not want to have any development in this particular context be off-grid and not using available water and available sewer connections where they were available. So we decided to call it NetBlue, blue being water, and to design a program that we could make available. You can see here National Geographic gave us a shout out about the program. And it took us about 3 years to put it together. You'll hear from Dwight Merriam on our team, who was one of our advisors in putting it all together. And so it took us about 3 years. We created a national ordinance and an offset methodology that can be customized as a community wishes, and they can adopt pieces of it as they wish, which is essentially what you'll hear Bozeman has done. And the partners that we had in the project, in addition to ourselves, were the Environmental Law Institute, a great partner that we work with on a number of projects, and River Network, who also helped us with a lot of the outreach around the country. And in doing this, we worked with 7 partner cities to vet what our approach was, to make sure that we were coming up with something that was very implementable. And if you take a look at those communities, you'll see that they're all over the country. They're in water-rich areas like Massachusetts, and presumably areas of Georgia are water-rich. But then we have, in the Midwest, we have Wisconsin. Madison, Wisconsin was part of the project, as was Austin, Texas, Albuquerque, New Mexico, the San Francisco Bay Area in California, and you'll see a dot for Bozeman in Montana. So Bozeman was one of the advisors that we looked to in helping us develop our materials to make sure that whatever we came up with would be something that they might consider adopting as well. So in our offset strategies, we have a whole list of potential ways that a developer can offset their water use. We'll talk a little bit more about what Bozeman is proposing in a minute, but the national template that we have features all of these areas that can be used to offset water use on an off-site basis. And we invite you to take a look at all of our materials that we have online, and to ask us any questions that you might have on the project. We have a page devoted to this process. You'll see the report that I described. There is a little thumbnail, and you can access it just going simply to www.net-blue.org. And we'd be happy to, again, work with any community who wants to do something similar to what Bozeman is considering and talking about here today. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over back to Jessica to go to the next area of our workshop.
Thanks, Marianne. So next we're going to talk about the City of Bozeman's water adequacy policy, and I'll introduce Brian Heaston. He's been working with the city for quite a while now and is sort of one of our water experts, and so he's going to talk with you about the water adequacy policy and some of our baseline water demand information. Next slide.
Good morning, everyone. This is Brian Heaston. I'm a senior water resources engineer here with the City of Bozeman. So we'll get into some of the details here concerning our local water adequacy policy. The policy itself is enacted in Code Section 38.410.130 here, and this concept of water adequacy, as Marianne just spoke to in the Net Blue program, is something that the city has actually had in place for quite some time now. The original enactment of our policy here began in the mid-1980s. And that coincided with the loss of a significant source of municipal water supply here for the city of Bozeman, that being Mystic Lake. Mystic Lake is actually a reservoir, and the dam that formed the reservoir was deemed unsafe and needed to be breached for public safety purposes in about 1984. So upon the breach of the dam and the loss of the supply, the city recognized a need to obtain additional water supply sources. And so that was the origination here of our adequacy policy. Next slide, please. So the policy has seen several revisions over the years, and the most recent one is fairly recent here, with an updated code that became effective in September of this year. Few of the major kind of updates here to the policy. We've shifted the threshold for compliance with the policy down to developments that increase the water demand upon the city's municipal water supply by more than 1/4 of an acre-foot per year. That number used to be 1 acre-foot. We've moved it down to 1/4 of an acre-foot because that's generally the amount of water that's necessary to supply one single family house here in the city. So we're looking at demand, these new demands on the system, and they need to be fully offset by one of 3 means: transfer of water rights into city ownership, implementation of water efficiency projects, or the payment of cash in lieu of water rights. The new code itself does allow for code deferrals as far as when the compliance with the policy itself is required as part of the development review and approval process. The deferrals are generally purposed with ensuring compliance occurs at the point of development in which we know what the actual use and density of development is going to be particularly upon commercial lots and multifamily lots in new subdivisions, because we just don't know what the commercial use is going to be or how dense the multifamily development will be at the time of subdivision. So we defer the code compliance until future development. Same occurs for future phases of phase site developments as well. Next slide, please. And we'll move on to the next one. So a fundamental component of the adequacy policy is estimating water demand for new developments that occur here within the city. We are currently putting together a water adequacy procedures manual, which is authorized by the new code section to provide implementation details concerning methodologies for estimating water demand for certain types, or for all types of development, as well as offsets that may be used to offset the demands that are estimated. So for single family residential development, we're looking at basing the demand estimate on the annual water use for homes that were built after 2009. So relating back to Jessica's portion of the talk, where she speaks to new homes using more water than historically older cohorts, we're looking at shifting the annual unit demand that we use for single family development to reflect the use of homes that are currently being built. On the multifamily side, we're taking a slightly different approach in that we're disaggregating the indoor and the outdoor components of annual use. And for the indoor side, we're looking at the residential population of a given multifamily development and an average indoor per capita use per person residing within the development. The analysis of city water use for residential uses here, we're seeing on average an indoor per capita use of 40 gallons per capita per day. So that's the number that we will be using for the indoor component of the annual demand estimate for multifamily developments. On the outdoor side, larger multifamily developments are required by the city's development code to prepare a detailed landscaping plan, and a component of that landscaping plan is estimating the irrigation water requirement. So we're going to take that IWR from the landscape plan itself as the outdoor demand estimate for multifamily projects. On the commercial, industrial, and institutional side, taking a similar approach in disaggregating the indoor and the outdoor uses. 3 different methods are generally applied for the indoor demand estimate for commercial uses, looking at kind of typical demands for common commercial uses that we're seeing developed, largely for retail and office. Another method that we employ here for CII developments is taking a look at comparable water uses for existing water customer accounts here in the city, and using that as a method to estimate what the water use for a given commercial development could be. The last method is having the development applicant itself come forward with a customized estimate of what they believe their annual water use estimate would be. Then on the outdoor side, again, we're going to reach into the landscaping plan. That's a component of the development code for these kinds of uses to pull out the irrigation water requirement. Next slide, please. So as in part of the cooperation here with the NetBlue program with the Alliance for Water Efficiency, we're developing a water demand calculator tool, which will be used for all development projects on a go-forward basis to document and really have a standardized way of estimating demands. So we have a consistent approach that's applied for all new projects. What you're seeing here is a screen grab of a draft version of the demand calculator. We're still in the development process, so there's going to be some refinement to what you see on the screen here, but this is generally what is going to be used by the city as a method to calculate and standardize demand estimates for new development. Next slide, please.
Okay, thanks, Brian. So Brian just kind of went over all of the adequacy requirements and how we're defining or calculating the anticipated demand for those. And then we're going to take that number, which is similar again to what we've done for the last 30 some years, and say, okay, well, here's what this anticipated demand is of your development. And there's a requirement to offset that at 1-to-1. So you have to offset the entire anticipated demand as a developer. And there are various methods for doing that. And Brian touched on these as well. I'm going to start with the water efficiency projects, because that's the new offset measure available to developers that came out of the recent code revisions. The transfer of water rights and the cash and lieu fee have been in place for a little while now. Next slide. So on-site water efficiency projects include projects occurring within the new development that's subject to the water adequacy policy. These projects lower the water demand of the new development, thus reducing the need for other offset strategies, such as the cash and lieu fee or water rights transfer, which are needed to meet the water adequacy policy. The city has predetermined some offset amounts that can be achieved through various indoor and outdoor water efficiency projects. These include multifamily indoor water use efficiency packages, and we'll get to that on the next slide. And that includes high efficiency toilets, shower heads, faucets, and clothes washers, as well as commercial indoor water use efficiency package, which includes toilets, faucets, and urinals that are all high efficiency. High efficiency bathroom fixtures have the same price point as their standard counterparts, and they've been third-party verified to perform as well or better than standard fixtures, and they save water. So from a cost standpoint, these projects are really a no-brainer. The cost of an efficient clothes washer is marginally higher than a less efficient model, but after crunching some numbers, we found that it's still quite cost-effective to implement these projects. We also offer offsets for the installation of weather-based irrigation controllers, rain sensors, and drought-tolerant landscaping. One thing to note is that some of these items may soon be required as we move forward with amendments to the landscaping code. So for all you developers out there, be sure to take advantage of these incentives while they're just incentives. Offset amounts earned through these projects are based on a % reduction of total estimated use from the demand calculator that Brian mentioned. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. We're still identifying the best approach for quantifying the offset amount for efficient landscaping. And we recognize that every development is different, so we do encourage custom projects as well. Next slide. Off-site, so on-site and off-site. So off-site water efficiency projects include projects occurring within existing developments. So these projects reduce overall city water demand and thus offset the water demand of the new development subject to water adequacy. Off-site water efficiency projects generally include the same project types that we discussed on the last slide. If you think back to Mary Ann's presentation, she also pulled up a slide with a bunch of different efficiency projects, such as toilets, cooling towers, and things like that. And so, again, we encourage custom projects and recognize that there are a lot of other opportunities to do some retrofitting of existing inefficient fixtures in the city. And to everyone on the call, if you know of any pastel colored toilets in Bozeman, like this blue one, they should all be added to an offset priority list, because even though they look really cool, they use about 5 to 7 gallons of water a flush. Next slide. So as Brian mentioned, the city's been working with the Alliance to create some tools for us to implement as we revise this policy and the water adequacy manual that he mentioned. And so the first piece of the approach here is the demand side calculator, which Brian mentioned. And then once we have an established estimated demand of the new development, the city and the developer can use this spreadsheet. Again, this is also just in draft form, but it's a way for the city and the developer to kind of mix and match and decide, you know, what are the best offset strategies for my development. And so here you can see this top section, it says offset strategy, and we have pre-populated percentages in here. And so this goes back to kind of these packages that I mentioned, where if you're developing a multifamily apartment building and you install high efficiency bathroom fixtures that meet the city's specification, then you get 25% off as an offset. So if you were otherwise going to pay cash in lieu, then you would pay 25% less. And so some of these projects, as I said, are from a cost perspective standpoint, really a no-brainer. That's one of them. Same with the CII, on-site indoor water use efficiency. You know, if that's implemented on the new development site, 15% off the otherwise cash in lieu fee, or however you're going to offset the total demand. And so I won't talk through all of these, but just to give a sense for some of the opportunities that developers have and a tool that can help them decide basically what the best approach is for their development. And it'll be broken out by on-site projects, which are the ones I just mentioned with the 25% and 15% offset. And then at the bottom of the screen, you can see the off-site retrofits. And this is where there really is a lot of opportunity to identify projects like pastel colored toilets, for example, to, you know, see, okay, if I were to go over here, maybe I'm going to go to a development that, you know, I built 10 years ago, and see what I could replace there to basically offset my water demand for this new development. And so it's really exciting that the city is moving forward with this, and you know, we really hope that this tool will help developers identify opportunities that are cost effective and ultimately help the city achieve its conservation goals. Next slide. Okay, I'll pass it back to Brian here.
Thanks, Jessica. So the last two offset categories that are available here under the code are transfer of water rights to the city and then payment of a cash in lieu fee. You know, water rights transfers are becoming more and more important as we move forward. As Jessica mentioned, the City of Bozeman is located in a closed basin for the appropriation of new surface water rights. So there's no water out there that the city can file a water right to, because all the water has already been claimed. So in many instances, tracts of land do have water rights on them that are appurtenant or otherwise associated, that may be useful for city purposes if transferred into city ownership. Now, that determination of usefulness is an evaluation that occurs individually given the unique elements of any given water right itself. Not all water rights are created equal, but if a water right is on a source where the city does have an existing water supply, Bozeman Creek and Highlight Creek specifically, those water rights are going to be useful for city purposes. Maybe not in the form that they are in currently. In all likelihood, those are going to be irrigation water rights used for that purpose historically. And in order for the city to be able to use those rights for municipal purposes, administrative change of that purpose needs to occur through a change authorization process that is administered by the State Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. Again, the city will take a hard look at any water rights that may be potentially available for transfer into city ownership, and we'll conduct an evaluation and due diligence on how that water may be potentially useful for city purposes. If transferred into city ownership, if a determination of usefulness is made, offset credits will be generated by that transfer. And the quantity of offsets generated is typically going to be about based on the quantity of water that would be available for city use. So generally, we'll take a look at the historic consumptive use of that water right, particularly if it's a historical irrigation water right. Consumptive use is important because that is the amount of water that can be changed to a new purpose through the state's change authorization process. And we really want to see water that is on attractive land, to continue to be used beneficially. Now that use doesn't necessarily have to relate to a transfer into city ownership. For instance, a development could take the approach of implementing a non-potable irrigation supply system for the benefit of the residents of the development itself. And if a system like that is implemented, that's going to decrease the annual demand needed, for water supply that would come from the city's municipal system. And so that's a direct offset, that would be applicable there to the development by virtue of continuing to use an irrigation water right for that beneficial purpose. If water is transferred into city ownership and the quantity of offset credits that are produced by the transfer, if that credit amount is in excess of what the estimated demand for the development would be, then those excess offsets get credited into an account that can be applied to future development. And we're looking at setting up a process where these excess offsets that are generated can be readily transferable from one party to another in order to apply those offsets to other future development. So any water demand estimate that cannot be otherwise offset by a transfer of water rights or the implementation of water efficiency projects, the balance needs to be offset through the payment of a cash in lieu fee. Cash in lieu is a program that the city has had in place again since the 1980s, when we originally enacted our water adequacy policy. The cash in lieu fee amount has been established by resolution of our city commission to be $6,000 per acre foot of estimated water demand. And the cash in lieu fee, goes into a cash in lieu fund balance that is reserved for specific purposes. Those fees can be used to purchase water rights for the city to purchase water rights to continue to provide for an adequate supply going forward, or to fund water conservation initiatives. As Jessica mentioned, water conservation is a crucial component of our future water supply portfolio. And so utilization of the cash in lieu fee for that purpose is a good way to generate additional water supply, similar to the generation of additional water supply through the purchase of new municipal water rights. Next slide, please. And I'll turn it back over to Jessica.
Thanks, Brian. So before we hear from Dwight, I thought it was important to take a minute to discuss how this approach to our water adequacy and including efficiency projects within it ties into some of our city plans. So to start off, the city adopted an integrated water resources plan in 2013 with the intent to guide the city's future water use and supply policies and practices, and ultimately to balance water supply and demand. And if you'll recall my graph with the scary red lines that show that we may expect a shortage of water supply in 10 to 15 years, again, that's comes from some of the information we got from the integrated water resources plan, and ultimately is a large reason why conservation is such a big component of city planning. The integrated water resources plan was driven by a technical advisory committee. So different folks from state government, from Montana State University, and various stakeholders, the agricultural community, were all involved in this plan. And basically the ultimate recommendation that came out of it, which again focuses on generating future supplies through water conservation. And building water efficiency measures into our water adequacy requirements certainly supports all of the overarching goals of the integrated plan. In 2017, the city adopted its first drought management plan with the goal to maximize available water supplies and reduce use during times of shortage. And I want to take a quick minute to talk about drought, because there are a lot of definitions of drought. And in terms of the City of Bozeman and the city's drought plan, we're really defining drought as below normal water supplies, so our snowpack, reservoir levels, and stream flow, that result from a prolonged reduction in precipitation. And so the drought plan basically outlines Bozeman's drought vulnerability, which definitely says that we have experienced drought often in the past and can expect to in the future. The plan outlines 4 stages of drought that can be declared by our city commission with corresponding drought response measures. So those response measures are going to be things like, reduced lawn watering, or perhaps a lawn watering ban. So things that we'd really be asking our community members to do to just ensure that we have reliable water supplies for the things we really need it for. This plan also outlines a communication campaign, and along with it, the city has a drought tracking tool. So we're constantly monitoring our water supplies and looking at, whether or not all of them look good, or if they are way below normal, and if we need to think about, adjusting kind of our management, at least in the interim, and declaring a drought stage. Again, ultimately, our city commission declares that. And city staff would go forward with the recommendation to our city commission at a public meeting. So, in terms of how this ties into these water adequacy changes, all response measures include conservation of non-essential water use. So again, looking at lawn watering bans and things like that. And so, drought resilient landscapes become really important if we do anticipate seeing more drought in the future, in terms of not just beautification of the landscape, but resale value and things like that. The more drought tolerant landscaping that we do have in our community, the more likely, we're going to have, again, like a nice environment and aesthetics around us in case we do have to let our lawns go, because we just don't have the water to support those. So moving on to the 2020 community plan. So this was, oh, that's okay. This was just adopted a week or two ago, and has been an effort in the works for a little while now. We had a lot of community involvement and public comment in developing this plan. And it basically recognizes that there are benefits and disadvantages to growth, including how growth impacts Bozeman's water supply. So the plan examines how the city is going to grow responsibly into the future, recognizing that the factors that draw people to Bozeman, like the outdoor recreation opportunities, economic growth, Montana State, are unlikely to change. So the plan aims to balance the interests of new and existing residents, and it outlines various themes which support the water adequacy requirements, and specifically the water efficiency offset option that was recently built into that policy. So the first theme in the community plan is a resilient city, and I don't think it's an accident that that was the first theme, because it is very important and aligns with our city's strategic plan as well. So I'm just gonna run through a few of the goals that fall within the theme of resilience and how this project aligns with those. One of those is for the city to continue to strengthen and develop resilience as a community, with a willingness and ability to adopt alternative strategies in response to changing circumstances. Another is to pursue community decisions that support resilience as well. So making good financial investments that have the potential for economic benefit, not just for the investor, but the entire community as a whole. And to include flexible and adaptive measures that consider future unknowns, which we just talked about, so drought, changing climate, and things like that. And to create long-term gains to the community with solutions that are replicable and sustainable, creating benefit for present and future generations. Another goal that aligns with this project is to pursue acquisition and development of diverse water sources and resources. You know, and by pursuing water through the conservation of it in these new projects, through these efficiency projects, that certainly meets that goal. Another is to support water conservation, use of native plants and landscaping, and development of water reuse systems. So Brian just mentioned the option to use water rights that were once, you know, maybe irrigated ag land and have a non-pot irrigation system. So that's expressly, you know, supported in the community plan. And last but not least, to update land development standards to implement the integrated water resources plan. The 2020 climate plan is also brand new and was just, actually I'm not sure it's finally adopted, but I do believe it's supposed to be this month. And it highlights various solutions and actions to support community resilience and efficiency that directly tie into, you know, the recent revisions to our water adequacy policy. Sustainability and climate action, they're both a top priority in the city's strategic plan. And although climate action addresses different issues and needs than water specifically, you know, smart water growth is inextricably linked to sustainability as a whole. So there are 5 solutions called out in the 2020 climate plan that support this project. One is to improve efficiency of existing buildings by using data and price signals to advance efficiency, and by establishing water benchmarking standards for commercial buildings. Another is to achieve net zero energy new construction. And again, although this overarching solution is focused on energy, it specifically calls for a voluntary program or pathway and incentives for above code construction. And that's basically exactly what we're talking about when we talk about these on-site and off-site efficiency projects. It's going above our standard plumbing code and things like that to, you know, take the initiative to be more sustainable and efficient within these developments. Another solution is to facilitate compact development patterns with sustainable neighborhood outreach, and to review the development code to enhance sustainable development. Another solution is to reduce vulnerability of neighborhoods and infrastructure to natural hazards. So again, thinking back to drought, specifically it calls to advance resilience in the development code and review process, and to incorporate resilience into infrastructure plans. You know, and one could argue that focusing on conservation as a way to generate new supplies is really a way that the city thinks of water conservation as infrastructure. It's really something that we absolutely need to ensure that we have a reliable supply as we grow. And the last solution within the climate plan is all about this. It's manage and conserve water resources, and it calls out for landscaping and irrigation upgrades, building on the success of the city's current water conservation program, and evaluating water conservation code adjustments. And so, you know, kind of back to this tying into the water adequacy policy and my earlier mention of revising our landscaping code as well, you know, to again, just ensure sustainability as we continue to grow. We are currently underway with 2 other water plans. So one is a water conservation plan. The city recently entered into an agreement with an engineering firm to develop this plan, which is basically going to include a qualitative screening of various water conservation program measures. There will be a public involvement piece to this. So at the end of the presentation, my email will be up on the slide. If you absolutely want to be involved in that, shoot me an email. Otherwise, we'll just try to put it out on the normal city forums and city website for comment. But again, that qualitative screening is going to look at different things the city can do in terms of conservation. So looking at different incentive programs, code revisions, city projects, and then after doing a qualitative screening, actually taking a hard look at the dollars and cents and doing a benefit cost analysis. It's also going to look at confounding factors. So I talked for maybe too long about the city's single family water use trends. And so we're going to really think about those things and think about how plumbing codes change and how lot sizes are changing when we do this, so that we can, you know, have the best information possible moving forward as we basically ultimately try to find out how much water the city can really expect to save through conservation into the future. So that's ultimately the goal of this plan. The plan will also include an implementation plan and a water conservation program measure evaluation tool, so that we can kind of make changes as we continue to grow and as things change, because change is what it's all about. And so we want to be flexible as we move forward with that plan in hand. And lastly, I'll just quickly mention that the city is developing a water supply optimization and management tool. And basically this will examine current water rights and historical yield, providing staff with the means to track and project current and future supply availability. So really taking a look at, you know, as I mentioned earlier, climate change is very likely to impact our yield of our water supplies going forward. And we just want to make sure that we have a way to track that and manage those supplies, knowing that that's around the corner. Next slide. All right, and next up is Dwight Merriam, and he's going to talk a little bit about the benefits for developers in taking this approach to offsetting water demand. So take it away, Dwight.
So I'd like to just introduce Dwight a little bit, just to explain why he's part of this program. Dwight's a planner and lawyer with over 40 years of experience working in the planning and law issues related to development. He's past president of the American Institute of Certified Planners, so he really gets the planning side, but he also has been practicing law in this field for a long number of years. And as someone who was very familiar with the needs of the development community, we thought it would be a great idea to have Dwight give that perspective. So I'll turn it over to Dwight.
Well, thank you very much, Mary Ann. And thank you for the opportunity to assist in the advisory committee for NetBlue and to be involved in this project here in Bozeman. Any program like this will succeed, as I know it will in Bozeman, only if it meets the needs of all the stakeholders, the development community, the City of Bozeman, and all its citizens. From the developer's perspective, and a good part of my practice, over the majority of my practice, has been representing developers, both small and large scale. It's essential that they have speed and certainty in getting through the approval process. And they need to be able to know in advance, Marianne, of starting a project that the cost will be. They need to be able to predict the cost and have ways to minimize or eliminate any additional costs. The plain fact is that developers hardly ever absorb the cost themselves. They cannot. They're in business. They need to make a fair return on their investment. Developers either pass additional costs back to those who are selling them the property, or they pass the cost forward to the consumer. Part of the additional cost of development will be reduced in this program during the life cycle as a result of utility savings. And further, developers may have a distinct marketing advantage in delivering new projects that are more efficient. I think, in the long run, as I will describe, water efficiency offsets can enhance property values by capitalizing that saved cost of utility service and ensuring, and this is so important, and ensuring that water is available for future development. Developers need to be able to pick up a regulation, analyze it quickly, and tell from that what they need to do to move forward. They need a process that will move them along to getting their development approvals and doing what developers do best, developing property, and in doing so, providing places for people to live, places where they can work and shop and recreate, and of course, carry on the full range of human activities. And they need to do so in a way that is profitable for them, that helps drive the local economy and is protective of the public interest, not only for today, but for generations to come. What strikes me about the revisions to Bozeman's water offset program is that they provide more options that will be attractive to customers and relatively easy to price out. Cost is, of course, a consideration, and developers need to be able to determine that in advance. And it is fortunate in this instance, in terms of minimizing costs, that most of the equipment needed to achieve conservation is readily available. Let's turn to what we call the value proposition. A significant part of my practice deals with valuation of properties because of the work that I do in representing property owners in eminent domain cases. I had the privilege of writing the chapter on valuation for the leading treatise on eminent domain. And as someone immersed in valuation issues, when I look at the water efficiency offsets, what I see for developers is an opportunity to create and to enhance value. Consumers want to be green. I just did a little research in the last week or so on what those numbers are, and they want to save money on monthly utility costs. The National Association of Realtors, with which I have a connection because I'm a counselor of real estate, did this study. They found that 59% of realtors who responded to an NAR survey report found that homeowners were very or somewhat interested in sustainability. That's nearly 2/3 of homeowners. They want sustainability. 70% of residential and commercial real estate agents and brokers revealed that promoting energy efficiency in home listings is either very or somewhat valuable. And finally, this recent study by NAR, utility and operational costs, 81%. 81% was the highest ranked building feature that homeowners indicated are somewhat or very important to their agents and brokers. And this carries over to multifamily and industrial and commercial as well. Now, developers, I think, can get an edge over their competitors by marketing the so-called green aspects of their developments, including renewable energy and utility savings. And building owners And landlords and operators can save real money by reducing water usage and sewage discharges. The more water you use, and this is so obvious, the more water you use and the more sewage you discharge, the more you pay. For water, you pay more for every 100 cubic feet over the 200 cubic foot base. A typical family of four, we've seen some of these statistics in the presentations today, in Bozeman uses 17,600 cubic feet a month. So there's real opportunity to bring down that number. In an apartment building, for example, where the supplemental charge is flat, every 100 cubic feet of water saved puts $2.10 in the landlord's pocket for each and every apartment. And if you can bring down the water usage by 20%, which is what the federal EPA water sense standard gives us, for that family of four, that's about 3,500 cubic feet and over $7 per month savings alone. But less water consumed means less water down the drain as sewage. And sewage discharge rates are 160% of water rates based on metered water usage for multifamily and commercial uses, and a whopping 290% higher for industrial uses. I think this is really remarkable and points to the value proposition here. And indeed, the cost savings combined for water and sewer for that apartment where a 20% reduction is achieved is almost $20. In addition, developers might even be able to use smaller water heaters while still providing the same level of service that larger ones would be needed for with larger flows. So water conservation involves not just saving water, but significant energy savings by not having to heat as much water for showers, for clothes washing, I guess dishwashing and sinks. And with less water heated as a consequence of a 20% reduction in consumption, that family of four, that typical family saves nearly 410 kilowatt hours of electricity each and every year. These cost savings for utilities have another big benefit. They increase affordability. Even using the relatively small incremental difference of $20 a month saved on water and sewer, plus the savings in electricity, those together at the margin can make a real difference. You know, every bit counts. What is essential here from the developer's perspective is to be cognizant of the life cycle costs, not just the cost this month or this year, but the life cycle costs of the building, particularly from the landlord's perspective, but also in terms of marketing to homeowners. Life cycle cost savings can be a powerful marketing and value enhancing selling point. Let me speak on options available and then wrap it up here, Marianne. The revised water offset program has multiple alternatives that allow developers to shape their projects to achieve their development approval at the least cost. These include the on-site and off-site water efficiency projects. We've had a good exposition of those in this presentation today, and to achieve the development approvals that they want at the least cost. The transfer of water rights to the city and the payment in lieu thereof is available. These alternatives can be mixed and matched and applied in varying ways. I think a developer has to orchestrate the approach so as to optimize their economic position. I predict, and this will be interesting to see how it develops, I predict there'll be some bartering and horse trading between and among the developers and owners of existing developments, such that in order to achieve the necessary water offsets for a project, the developer might negotiate the retrofitting of water using devices in older developments in order to offset demand for the new development. The landlord of an older apartment building, for example, can benefit by the installation of new plumbing fixtures or irrigation systems and controllers, capital improvements that might not otherwise be affordable, but now could be part of the package put together by the developer of new space, who simply finds it more economic to do retrofitting elsewhere than to do all of that on their own development site. Landlords of multifamily buildings, office and other commercial buildings, and individual owners of older homes might actually even pay a developer something less than what it would otherwise cost, net of the available rebates in Bozeman to have that developer retrofit their fixtures. It will be interesting, as I said, to see how the economics of this program, which are positive for all concerned, play out as it's implemented. The conveyance of water rights may also be advantageous for developers as part of the water offset program. Water has value. Heard some of the discussion of that already. And the city will recognize the value of a water right offered for transfer given the right's unique attributes. As noted, not all water rights are created equal. But if a water right has seniority to not getting called during a normal water year, if it is on a current municipal water supply source, and if it is still actively being beneficially used and has a clear chain of title, it will have higher, shall I say, usefulness quotient and may be valued as a demand offset accordingly. Again, the effort the developer here should take is to balance the cost of on-site, inside and outside water conservation methods to achieve the necessary offset, and to mix and match, to orchestrate's the other term I use, that with payments in lieu and dedication of water rights. All of this in turn, I'm confident, can be done in context with other property owners in the city to have the ability to contribute opportunities for water offsets and for the conveyance of water rights. So here we are. In short, there are lots of opportunities for developers to minimize their costs and perhaps even achieve a net economic benefit with the marketing advantages of reducing utility costs for landlords and tenants and homeowners. And in the end, I think what is so important is being able to continue the highly profitable development. I'm a planner. I look out ahead. I'm over the horizon targeting, if you will. And I'm looking, at 2030, 2040. And the city has been blessed with development. And that development can continue if there's an adequate water supply to support it. This revised water offset program directly benefits the development community by enabling it to continue its work for the benefit of themselves, for landlords, for tenants, and for homeowners. And finally, I'd say in closing that this is an exciting time for the city, for the citizens of Bozeman, and for the development community, because indeed it portends a very strong development future for all of you if you embrace this initiative, which will go far in ensuring that you have enough water to carry you forward for the foreseeable future. So thank you for this time, Marianne.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Dwight. I think, Jessica, that brings us back to comments and questions and answers. I think we're at that part of the agenda. And so what I'd like to do is to make some closing remarks while you all type in your questions into the question box for GoToWebinar. First of all, thanks for joining us. We want to make sure if you have questions that we answer them in the time that we have allotted. We have plenty of time for that. So type them in and we'll take them in the order that they were received. There is that handout, that one-page handout that describes what we're doing here. So don't forget to download that before the webinar is over. And as Jessica mentioned, we wanted to give you her email. So if you have any further questions after the workshop is over and that you'd like to ask her, please feel free to email her at that email address that's given. So at this point, I'd like to ask Leah McCarthy, who was running our GoToWebinar platform here, if we have any questions for the speakers.
All right, thanks, Marianne. Yep, we have a few questions that have come in. Let's start with, has there been any discussion about eliminating retention ponds and making developers use strictly detention to increase downstream water supply?
Oh boy, that's a tough one to get started with. Brian, do you, I'm not really involved in stormwater with the city. Brian, do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. So to directly answer the question, no, that's not a policy consideration that we've given any thought to here at this point, and it may potentially have merit. Detention ponds are beneficial from kind of a land use perspective because they occupy a smaller footprint, and they do return water directly to a surface water body that may be available for downstream users. The issue with that water that is discharged from a detention pond is the city's availability to use it. Our municipal water supply sources and our intakes are well up gradient above town. So we wouldn't directly benefit or have the potential to divert that water and make it available for municipal use.
Okay, now we have somebody asking, is there a stormwater component in the city's water conservation plan?
So the city does have a stormwater program, and I know that they're very active in, monitoring water quality. All of our stormwater in Bozeman is direct discharge to our streams. And so they are very active in monitoring the water quality and installing infrastructure to ensure that some of the discharge points do clear out, some of the things that would otherwise harm the quality of those rivers. They're a little bit, the stormwater program is separate from water conservation in terms of our long-term planning. Now, that's not to say that we don't work together, but I don't know the kind of ins and outs and the details of exactly, kind of what their current and, near-term future goals are. And Brian, if you do, you can chime in, but.
Well, I can tell you that they're in the process of procuring an engineering firm to prepare the next version of the city's stormwater management plan. So, that would be the planning process and the document that may be able to bear that question out. If I'm kind of reading in between the lines there, I'm kind of implying that stormwater may potentially be available as a source of supply to meet demands, and that's potentially problematic under the state's Water Use Act, wherein any beneficial use of water, any diversion of water to be put to a beneficial use needs to have a water right. And as mentioned, the Upper Missouri Basin is closed to the appropriation of new water rights. So you can't just file on a stormwater, retention or detention pond and be able to legally put that water to use. So that's a potential barrier, to using stormwater to offset water demands.
Okay, thank you. Next question, does Bozeman require landscape irrigation contractors to have certifications through the Irrigation Association? What oversight is given to the design, installation, and maintenance of residential and commercial irrigation systems?
Great question. So currently, no, the city does not require any certification for landscape irrigation contractors. I had mentioned earlier that we're looking at revising our landscape code. And, honestly, currently the landscape code doesn't do a lot for water conservation. There's a lot of opportunities to change our code, and we have this kind of year-long plan at this point. Anyway, we'll see how long it takes to kind of chip away at, the low-hanging fruit and moving on to hopefully doing exactly that. And so we do offer educational classes through the Irrigation Association to irrigation contractors, and we get an okay turnout, but with the growth in Bozeman, honestly, even though many of the contractors do have an interest in furthering their education and installing more efficient systems, etc., they're so busy that it's nearly impossible to find a time to host a class where everyone can come, because often those folks plow in the winter, and then winter immediately turns into irrigation startups. And so, we do try, and we do, regularly communicate with those folks about what we're doing and, efficient installations, things like that. To the latter part of the question, our current plan review process and our current landscaping code, it does require landscaping, it does require irrigation systems. but it does not have any performance or design standards for those systems. And so that is something, one of the low-hanging fruit pieces of this landscape code revision project, is to basically outline, design and performance standards for these systems. Some examples are simple and include achieving head-to-head coverage, requiring weather-based control, rain sensors, and things like that. And so we're hoping that we can get that in place sooner than later.
Okay, next question. Does the city have a recommended water or sewer submetering program for multifamily developments?
So we do not currently submeter for multifamily or for irrigation. Up to this point, it's been an issue largely on staff time and ability to be able to meet the demand that would require of our water department staff. And so as part of these landscaping code revisions, we are looking at requiring irrigation submeters for properties that exceed a certain amount of irrigable area yet to be identified. And then with regard to the multifamily question, we don't, we recognize the benefit of that, but we have not yet gotten to that point.
All right, has a closed groundwater basin ever been reopened in Montana? Any chance this basin could be reopened?
Brian, that pause is me waiting for you. Brian, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, sorry, I was caught by the dreaded mute button. Yeah, so the likelihood of the basin closure being lifted, in my opinion, here at this point is low. The basin closure for the Upper Missouri was a legislative closure of the basin, subject to the full adjudication of water rights within the entirety of the basin itself. The adjudication process is ongoing at the Montana Water Court, and they have not issued final decrees for any of the basins within the Upper Missouri, including the Lower Gallatin. So until final decrees are issued throughout the entirety of the Upper Missouri, we're not even at a point to be able to have that kind of policy conversation with the legislature or the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation as to lifting the basin closure.
Okay. Next question, does the 2031 projection of demand exceeding supply incorporate climate projections, or is it based on historical climate information?
It's yes and no. So that's based on, again, just as a reminder, it's based on our current gallons per capita day use and, an anticipated or possible growth projection of what we've been seeing lately in, excess of 4% a year. And I didn't call it out when I had that slide pulled up, but on that graph, those two red lines intersected, and there was a little arrow that pointed, and it said current reliable supply 11,500 acre feet. And so it's my understanding, and Brian can jump in if I miss anything, that's a little less than our actual paper water rights. And so there's a little bit of room built in there, but not much. And to answer the question, that does not include any kind of robust analysis on how climate change could impact that number.
Let me jump in to clarify that a little bit. So the Integrated Water Resources Plan did take a look at potential climate impacts to water supply availability and annual yield of our current water supply sources. The findings indicated that the available supply is trending in a downward direction. and that there's a shift from how that precipitation is going to occur and when it's going to occur. So that 11,500 acre feet number does incorporate that climate impacted scenario within the integrated water resources plan, but it's just that. It's a scenario. It was done back in 2013. There's been advances in climate modeling. Various models have different different potential outcomes or outlooks for supply availability here in Southwest Montana. So that is a component of what has precipitated the need for the water supply optimization and management tool, where we're really going to take a harder look at reliable supply availability and yield of the municipal water sources that are currently online. And not only take a look at this on an annual yield basis, but really drill down into a monthly hydrograph and and determine, again, what the reliable yield on a monthly basis is going to be. So that reliable yield will necessarily need to account for shorter water years. So in essence, when we're in drought conditions, because we need to be able to plan for the worst case scenario, particularly when making development decisions. We want to know that we're going to have adequate supply to meet the demands of proposed development. And we have to take a look at those years when water is in lesser availability due to drought conditions. So that doesn't necessarily take a look at potential climate impacts in projecting those, what those may be in the future. Instead, taking a look at historical information on those shorter water years to arrive at a monthly reliable yield.
Okay, thank you. What is the status of gray water laws in Montana? Can you utilize plumbing system gray water for irrigation in this state? If not, is there any group lobbying the legislature or state to allow this?
I'll take a crack at that one too. So there is an allowance for gray water use in state statute. Now we haven't seen the implementation of that here within the city of Bozeman, and honestly, I'm not sure how the use of gray water works within the city's adopted building codes. So we'd have to take a look at that, to see how the building codes actually treat gray water, and whether that's an option that's available here for the community.
Okay, I think kind of along those lines, has the city considered requiring or encouraging more purple pipe for irrigation?
We do have, so the integrated water resources plan for its supply portfolio, recommended supply portfolio to meet the anticipated water supply needs 50 years down the road, does include recommendations to implement non-potable irrigation systems within the city. The challenge with implementing those, and yes, of course, we're going to encourage them. The challenge to actually get them implemented is having a water right that has sufficient priority on the source to be able to meet the irrigation demands for the entire irrigation season. Many of the water rights here in the Gallatin that are maybe potentially available for transfer or continued utilization are relatively junior in the priority scheme, and generally get curtailed sometime in the midst of the growing season. In other words, they don't make it all the way through. So for a developer to invest the capital into developing or installing a purple pipe system for irrigation supply, they're going to need a water right that has reliability to make that water available for use all the way through the season. And there aren't a huge number of water rights that have that kind of seniority here that may be available within the city's growth plan boundary.
Okay, are there any groundwater aquifers to tap into in the area, or does this infringe on water rights?
So there is a very large unconfined alluvial aquifer in the Gallatin Valley that is under the City of Bozeman. The city's currently in a process to implement a groundwater municipal supply source. The challenge there is not water availability. The water's there. The challenge is obtaining the legal right to use it because of the basin closure to the appropriation of new water rights. There's a lot of nuance and technicality associated with developing groundwater supplies in closed basins, but it essentially boils down to groundwater, interacts with surface water bodies. And at some point, water that is currently in the ground is going to express itself in a surface water body here in the valley, further down gradient. And there's existing rights and claims to use water that are in these streams. So in order for the city to develop a groundwater supply source, we have to determine what the impact to surface water bodies are as a result of the groundwater pumping, and then to mitigate those impacts in location, in the proper amount, and at the correct time to not cause adverse effects and impact anybody's existing legal right to use water. So it's a challenging framework to develop a groundwater supply source in, but that's the process and the rules and the regulations that we have to comply with, and we're doing our best to get to the point where we have a groundwater supply developed and connected to the city's municipal water system.
Okay, this looks like kind of a two-part question. Would the city be involved in facilitating conversations with existing developments for retrofitting older fixtures? And does the city know which existing developments use the most water and may be prime candidates for retrofitting?
Yeah, I can answer that. So, we haven't really figured out the details of how those offsite offset projects will work. However, yes, this is important for us for all the reasons we've been talking about all this time. And so the city would absolutely help in identifying opportunities. We have yet to determine, and this is in part because we would need to talk with our legal team about it, on officially if the city would serve as a middleman in those, or if we would just facilitate those connections and help identify those opportunities with developments that are using a lot of water. So in terms of that piece, we're not sure, but either way, the city does have the ability to identify those projects that are currently using a lot of water, and can help run some numbers on cost effectiveness and things like that to identify which project a developer may want to move forward with. And so, as we continue working on this manual and get it finally adopted, that's something that we're going to continue discussing internally as well.
All right, thank you, Jessica. Next question, is Bozeman considering policies on outdoor watering such as alternative day and time of day scheduling?
Yeah, so currently in our drought management plan, alternative scheduling is recommended as a stage 2 response measure. but we are looking at least including a time of day restriction in our code changes, and you know, maybe leaving the day of week kind of response measures to the drought plan. Currently our landscaping code is in you know, our unified development code section of our municipal code, and some of those other water restrictions reside in a different chapter. And so we're going to look at opportunities to maybe move some things around so that we can address all of that at one time.
All right, and in the drought management plan for the community measures related to each stage, are these recommendations or requirements?
So the way that it's currently written in the drought management plan is that when city staff goes to our city commission to recommend a drought stage declaration, staff will also recommend their response measures to declare with that. So, you know, if we're in a stage, if we think we should declare a stage 3 drought, you know, I can almost assure you that we'll be recommending our city commission declare that drought stage along with the response measure to ban lawn watering. And so it's ultimately up to the city commission on which measures to require, but once they decide and those are declared, they would then be required.
Okay, and do you have an estimated completion date for the Water Adequacy Procedures Manual?
Great question. So we're hoping to get that wrapped up first quarter of 2021. Sooner the better. You know, we do have a new code and additional components here to the offset program that, you know, need to have clarity and transparency provided in the manual. So the sooner that we can get that done and over to the city manager for the approval of the document, the better off we're going to be. So we're going to make a push, hopefully, to have that done during the beginning portion of the first quarter of next year.
All right, a question about how will drought measures be enforced?
So the drought plan itself is vague in how it addresses that, but as of right now, and this may change if we find ourselves in a higher drought stage, you know, kind of all of a sudden, but as of right now, the communication campaign is key. So the scope of that will increase commensurate with the drought stage. And so we hope, you know, that through a lot of public outreach, we can you know, get everybody on board, and in a perfect world, not have to enforce a lot, but assuming that we do, there's a couple different avenues for that. So one is that residents can call the Water Conservation Division and inform us of anyone that is, you know, not complying with those water use restrictions. And then we would work with our police department and our code enforcement office to basically ensure that that's being addressed. Our code does give the Public Works Director the authority to fine anyone who is not complying. And so the intention would be to do a lot of targeted outreach to anyone out of compliance. And then, you know, if we're really not getting anywhere through outreach, we could ultimately fine them. And if it really got bad, could ultimately shut off their water if that need arose.
Okay, next question. Does the Bozeman wastewater treatment plant anticipate any treatment issues if subdivisions switch over to high efficiency products due to higher concentration of waste to water ratios coming into the plant?
No, we don't anticipate any issues with that. Currently, we have a fairly typical residential strength waste for BOD and nutrients that are moving into the plant. You know, by implementing efficiency projects that would reduce the indoor demand by 20%, it's not going to move the needle to the point where it would negatively affect the treatment process there at the plant. So we think we're in pretty good shape with respect to being able to handle any increased concentration of waste loading to the plant coming from efficiency projects.
Okay, and does the city have any ideas or plans to expand water infrastructure such as another dam or reservoir?
No, currently dams and reservoirs are off the table. So there was a planning process that predated the integrated water resources plan to take a look at building a fairly large dam and reservoir within the Sourdough municipal watershed. But the political will to move forward with that project wasn't there. There was a fairly loud chorus that we heard from the community that was not a project that they supported. So we've moved away from developing or implementing a project of that sort. Any storage that may be implemented up in the Sourdough watershed would be of much smaller scale. It wouldn't be anything on the order of what you see at Highlight. If anything, it would be a series of smaller low-head dams, so 10 feet or less, or potential implementation of beaver mimicry structures to help increase available supply.
Hey, I think you touched on aquifers earlier, but the question just came in about, has the city considered aquifer storage and recovery as a potential storage option?
We have conceptually the challenge with aquifer storage and recovery here in the Gallatin is we have a large unconfined alluvial aquifer. So implementing or figuring out where you can put that water in the ground and where exactly it will be stored is quite challenging. It's not similar at all to a confined aquifer situation, where when you put water in the ground, you know exactly where it's going to be, and it's not going to continue to move around. So dominion and control over water that is stored within the groundwater aquifer is a real challenge and has many legal and technical elements associated with it.
Okay, and that is actually the last question, except a couple people have asked if the PDF of the presentation will be available.
If you wouldn't mind emailing me, this is Jessica, I'm happy to send that to you.
All right, and that is all the questions we have.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for everyone that spent all this time with us. We really appreciate it. And again, if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to me and I'd be happy to get you answers.
Everyone for attending.